Everyone thought Sergeant Lewis earned his medal for bravery in battle. But when a young soldier found the original citation, it revealed a horrifying truth. That medal didn't honor a hero. It covered up a massacre. The sun beat down on Fort Ridgefield's parade ground as hundreds of soldiers stood in formation, their uniforms crisp, boots gleaming. In the center stood Sergeant Marcus Lewis, his chest already decorated with ribbons earned from years of service. But today was different. The Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal was about to be pinned on his uniform, a high honor, reserved for operations that carried both danger and significance. As the general stepped forward, reading from a polished speech about bravery, courage, and duty, Lewis stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. The applause that followed was deafening, and cameras flashed as the medal caught the sunlight. He saluted, stepped back, and stood tall, a perfect symbol of honor. But inside, a storm raged. That medal didn't feel like a reward. It felt like a warning. No one else knew what really happened during Operation Iron Widow, except maybe a few men who had since disappeared or been reassigned in quiet silence. He remembered the cries, the confusion, and the smell of smoke. All of it masked now by the polished narrative written for the press. As the crowd dispersed and the ceremony ended, Lewis walked away alone, barely speaking a word. Young recruits whispered in awe, calling him a legend. But behind their words, Lewis could hear ghosts. In the privacy of his room that night, he placed the medal on the table and stared at it for hours. Not because he was proud, but because he didn't know how much longer he could carry its weight. Outside, the base slept under a blanket of silence, but Lewis stayed awake, knowing this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. And somewhere, deep in the classified corners of the military, the truth still waited to surface. 2 weeks after the medal ceremony, Sergeant Marcus Lewis received a sealed envelope marked "Eyes Only." No return address, no rank, just his name. He opened it in the dim light of his quarters, hands trembling slightly. Inside was a photo, an aerial shot of the village where Operation Iron Widow had taken place, but something was off. The image had been taken 2 days after the mission's official end, and in the corner, circled in red, stood a figure. A local man Lewis thought had died during the operation. Alongside the photo was a single sentence typed on plain white paper. "You didn't see everything." His breath caught. The official report had claimed the mission was a success. Hostile camp neutralized, no civilian casualties. But Lewis remembered things differently. Screaming radios, blurred commands, and the distinct sound of children crying before the airstrike. He'd buried that memory. Now someone wanted him to dig it up. Lewis drove out of base under the pretense of leave, heading toward an old contact, Elena Cruz, a former military intel officer who'd vanished after blowing the whistle on a failed operation years ago. She met him in a dusty roadside diner outside Arlington. Her eyes scanned him up and down, then dropped to the photo. "They're scrubbing the mission records," she whispered. "They want to erase what really happened, and that man?" She tapped the photo. "He survived and he's speaking." Lewis felt his stomach twist. If the truth came out, careers would burn. Maybe even his. But justice, that might be worth the fire. Elena slid him a drive. "This has footage they buried. If you want to finish what you started, you'll need this." Lewis nodded slowly. The medal on his chest wasn't just heavy. It was now a target. Marcus Lewis drove through the night. The USB drive Elena had given him weighing heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. By dawn, he reached a secure storage unit tucked behind an abandoned truck depot. This was where he'd hidden his old gear, encrypted laptops, and a copy of the classified mission logs he wasn't supposed to have. With shaky hands, he inserted the drive into the system. The footage was raw, unedited, drone captures, helmet cams, intercepted comms. But one file stopped his heart cold. It showed the moment the strike was called, a delay in communication, then a direct hit on a schoolhouse. The thermal overlay showed heat signatures, tiny ones, children, civilians, collateral damage the report had claimed. A lie. And the man in the red circle? He was seen pulling 2 children out alive. Lewis had never been told that. Worse, the order had come from someone far above field command. A general's voice cut through the radio traffic. "We clean it now, or we don't get another chance." That wasn't about safety, it was politics. Lewis clenched his jaw. The medal pinned to his uniform wasn't for heroism. It was hush money. His phone buzzed. No number. Just one message. "We know you've seen it." Then a second. "You're not untouchable." Lewis realized this wasn't about one operation. It was about a system. And now that he had the truth, he was the threat. He copied the files to a burner device and torched the original system. He couldn't trust command, the media, or even former allies. But he could trust what he saw with his own eyes. Marcus zipped his bag shut. He wasn't running anymore. He was going back to the one place he swore never to return. Washington greeted Marcus Lewis with cold stares and colder threats. The capital felt more like a battlefield than any war zone he'd served in. But this time he wasn't armed with weapons, he carried truth. Disguised in a faded hoodie, he moved through the back corridors of power, meeting one of the few men he still trusted, retired Senator Harold Greene. Greene had once led the investigation into covert operations overseas before being mysteriously forced into retirement. When Marcus showed him the footage, Greene's weathered face went pale. This would bury careers," he whispered. "No," Marcus corrected him. "It would expose murder." They agreed to leak the files during a live hearing on military accountability. Greene still had a backdoor into the chamber. But the system wasn't going to go down without a fight. That night, Marcus was ambushed outside his motel by two men in civilian clothes. Trained, silent, lethal. He fought back with every ounce of instinct left in his bones. Bruised and bloodied, he left them unconscious in the alley. They didn't take his life, but they took the warning shot. He was being hunted by the very country he bled for. Despite it, Marcus stood outside the Capitol the next morning as crowds gathered for the hearing. He locked eyes with Greene, who nodded once. Then the feed began, live to millions. And as Greene inserted the drive into the Senate's broadcast system, a ripple ran through the room. Footage of the mission played, including the voice of the general giving the fatal order. Gasps echoed across the hall. Phones lit up. Journalists froze mid-sentence. The truth was no longer buried under medals and false reports. But just as Marcus thought they'd won, a stern voice echoed from behind. "Step away from the senator." Armed agents surrounded him. Marcus raised his hands slowly as armed federal agents swarmed the hearing room. Cameras continued to roll live, capturing every second. The world was watching, and that was the only thing keeping him alive. "You're under arrest for leaking classified military intelligence," the lead agent barked, shoving Marcus to his knees. Senator Greene tried to intervene, shouting about constitutional rights and whistleblower protections, but the agents ignored him. Then, a new presence entered the room. Calm, composed, radiating command. It was Admiral Connor Blake, recently retired but still feared in every military circle. His sudden appearance caused confusion among the agents. "Release him," the admiral said with authority. The lead agent hesitated. "Sir, we have orders." "And I have the president on the line," Blake replied, lifting his secure comms device. "Do it." The agents backed off. Marcus stood, stunned. "Why?" he asked. The admiral looked him square in the eyes. "Because I gave that same order years ago, and lived with it every day since. You did what I never had the courage to do." News anchors were already dissecting the footage, naming the operation, exposing the truth. The cover-up had collapsed. Investigations were announced. Medals were stripped. Resignations flooded the Pentagon. The Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, once pinned to Marcus's chest, tarnished by lies, was now a symbol of something more: redemption. A year later, Marcus stood quietly at Arlington, placing that same medal on the grave of his fallen teammate, Daniels. "We didn't die for secrets," he whispered. Behind him, a small crowd gathered. Survivors, families, whistleblowers, heroes in silence. For the first time in years, Marcus felt peace. The war was over, not with bullets, but with truth. And the man they once tried to erase had become the symbol they could no longer ignore. If the story moved you, Let us know in the comments and share it with others who believe in truth and honor. Subscribe